People like delicate passages in loud rock bands. You enter and become powerful again. Glenn Raymond Tipton, a heavy metal genius known for booming riffs and searing solos. He and Judas Priest used music to fight for 4 decades, and every riff could shake a generation. But fate constantly tests the greats. Glenn Tipton faced his greatest challenge as Judas Priest conquered the world. He fought Parkinson's illness alone, a silent enemy that was eroding his music talent day by day. From a blues-loving Blackheath boy to a heavy metal legend, from breaking the law and Painkiller to his theatrical retirement, Glenn Tipton's life is full with triumph, tragedy, and perseverance. How did Glenn Tipton's story begin before he shaped Judas Priest and faced his biggest opponent? Return to the beginning of a heavy metal legend. Glenn Raymond Tipton was a normal youngster from Blackheath, Staffordshire, England, before becoming a legendary heavy metal guitarist. No one could have guessed that this modest adolescent would guide Judas Priest and change rock music. Glenn Raymond Tipton was born in Blackheath, Staffordshire, England, on October 25, 1947, into a musical family. Glenn, who would later become a famed heavy metal guitarist, initially disliked such forceful, thrilling music. He initially heard his mother's delicate piano melodies, not booming electric guitars or furious riffs. Glenn's mother, a pianist, shaped his musical tastes. She played at home often, surround Glenn with beautiful harmonies, and teach him music theory earlier than other kids. He was a quiet, inactive child. He was introverted and reticent, finding consolation in music where he could openly express his emotions. Glenn learned piano from his mother. He had innate talent and rapidly learned the piano, but it never enthralled him. Despite its beauty, he believed it lacked freedom and vitality that the piano keys could not deliver. The turning point was when his older brother Gary Tipton brought home an electric guitar. When Glenn stroked the strings, he was captivated by the raw, electric sound, something the piano had never provided. Glenn learned his first chords from Gary, but he wasn't a guitar prodigy. Before mastering the fretboard, he struggled with every note for months. Instead of giving up, Glenn stayed relentless and determined, which would define his playing style. Emphasis on precision, emotion, and fluidity rather than speed. Instead, he loved the blues growing up in the golden age of rock and roll, when the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and the Who ruled. He spent hours listening to and practicing with Eric Clapton, Jimi Hendrix, and Fleetwood Mac's Peter Green, emphasizing emotion above skill. He turned music into a passion rather than a hobby. Glenn was a precise and patient machinist before pursuing music. Whatever he did, he was always with his guitar. He spent every free time practicing, playing in small clubs, and looking for a way to make his hobby his career. Fate then brought a blues-loving young guy into the realm of heavy metal, changing it forever. Early work. After falling in love with the guitar, Glenn Tipton realized music was more than a hobby. This was his fate. However, becoming a heavy metal legend was difficult. Glenn spent years experimenting with styles and perfecting guitar skills that would define a generation before becoming Judas Priest's musical maestro. Glenn Tipton started his career with the Flying Hat Band, a hard rock band influenced by Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin, in the early 1970s. This period helped Glenn develop his stage appearance, guitar style, and music industry knowledge. Glenn later joined Judas Priest, and the band favored intricate riffs and long solos. His innate talent and dedication allowed the Flying Hat Band to open for Deep Purple, one of the greatest rock bands of the time. Glenn learned from famous guitarists like Ritchie Blackmore. Despite their potential, the Flying Hat Band failed. After failing to land a major record deal, they split without releasing an album. Early failures could have ended dreams for many musicians. But Glenn Tipton persisted. When one door closed, a far larger one opened. While rehearsing for their 1974 first album Rock'n'Rolla, Judas Priest was still seeking for a musical direction. Despite being influenced by blues and progressive rock, the band had no identifiable style. Glenn Tipton was the appropriate second guitarist to establish their sound. Glenn contributed a new perspective, sharper melodies, original songwriting, and great technique from the start. His dynamic cooperation with KK was possibly his most important contribution. Downing, a fantastic Judas Priest complement. Tipton played with melodic precision, depth, and structure, whereas Downing played raw, aggressive, and crazy. They rapidly developed one of the best twin guitar duos in heavy metal history, a formula never previously done. The band found their sound with Rock'n'Rolla, even though it failed commercially. Judas Priest had entered their most vital moment, which would change heavy metal. They had a long way to go before conquering the world. After joining the band that would define his career, Glenn Tipton began a legendary, successful career. Glenn Tipton joined Judas Priest in 1974 and helped reinvent the band's sound and make them one of the most enduring heavy metal icons. Before Tipton, Judas Priest experimented with progressive rock and blues rock, but his entrance brought razor-sharp riffs, explosive melodies, and an uncompromising mentality. The album Sad Wings of Destiny was Tipton's first big Judas Priest contribution. 1976. This marked a departure from rock-a-rolla with darker, more forceful, and more dramatic songs. Tipton was vital in songwriting and guitar work, especially in Victim of Changes and The Ripper. His playing style suited KK Downing superbly, balancing technical skill and unrestrained aggressiveness, a Judas Priest trademark. Through Stained Class, 1978, and Hellbent for Leather, 1979, Judas Priest evolved from a hard rock band into a heavy metal juggernaut. While rock music still included blues roots, Judas Priest pioneered a cleaner, sharper, and more aggressive sound. Exciter helped establish speed metal. Tipton was an excellent guitarist and prolific lyricist by this point, defining the band's approach. British Steel, 1980, established Judas Priest as heavy metal's dominant force. Top hits like Breaking the Law and Living After Midnight changed heavy metal's image. Leather jackets, studs, motorcycles, and a deliberate rebellion. Tipton was a technical guitar expert and a composer who created simple, electrifying songs that drove Judas Priest to global fame. The 1980s were Judas Priest's golden age, led by Glenn Tipton. From 1982's Screaming for Vengeance with Electric Eye and You've Got Another Thing Coming to 1984's Defenders of the Faith, every record was relentlessly heavy metal and inventive. Tipton perfected his guitar skills, blending speed, precision, and emotion to create metal's most memorable solos. Success had its drawbacks. In 1990, Judas Priest faced one of music's most unusual lawsuits. Stained Class, 1978, apparently impacted two teens, James Vance and Raymond Belknap, who attempted suicide. Their families sued the band. The families said Better by You Better Than Me encouraged suicide subliminally. Tipton and the band faced false claims during the months-long trial. Tipton famously said Judas Priest was acquitted, but the litigation stained their career. After this controversy, Judas Priest found success with 1990's Painkiller. This record showcased their speed and ferocity with lightning-fast riffs and explosive solos that lit up every stage. Painkiller exploded with shredding, tapping, and fast riffing, unlike Tipton's prior lyrical and bluesy style. The album also inspired guitarists like Dimebag Darrell, Pantera, Zakk Wylde, and Sinister Gates, Avenged Sevenfold, to emulate Judas Priest. Just as Judas Priest reached their peak, a significant shock occurred. The band lost Rob Halford in 1992. This left Judas Priest in a tough spot and heightened tensions. In the 1990s, Glenn Tipton and KK Tim Ripper Owens replaced Halford, and Downing struggled to keep the band together. Judas Priest failed to reclaim their old prominence, and Tipton and Downing grew irritable. KK Downing publicly bashed Tipton for over-controlling the band. In his autobiography, Heavy Duty, Days and Nights in Judas Priest, Downing indicated that Tipton influenced band decisions more than Rob Halford or management. After Halford returned in 2003, the band seemed to stabilize, but Tipton and Downing never reconciled. Tipton was a legend by then. Judas Priest's power remained strong as he pushed creative boundaries with songs like Judas Rising. In 2008's ambitious concept album Nostradamus, he showed his love of heavy metal despite his age. KK in 2011. Downing left Judas Priest, blaming Tipton and management for a hostile work atmosphere. Glenn Tipton never addressed these claims, but Downing's final departure showed that Judas Priest had changed. As Glenn Tipton's body began to fail, the question persisted. He had spent his life making Judas Priest a metal legend. When his physical strength went against his unshakable spirit, could he continue? The Parkinson's battle as Judas Priest continued their unrelenting march through heavy metal. Glenn Tipton fought a new battle within himself. By 2014, when the band released Redeemer of Souls, Glenn continued to write, perform, and give his all on stage. It felt weird. Hands that were once fluid betrayed him. The periodic stiffening of his fingers caused brief tremors that became increasingly chronic. Glenn understood this wasn't a little issue, but he believed he could fix it. His body had different ideas. By 2018, when Judas Priest recorded Firepower, problems had worsened. Riffs that were easy before were suddenly difficult. After more than 4 decades, the guitar no longer seemed like an extension of himself. His worst dread was confirmed after many medical visits. He had Parkinson's. Accepting this was difficult for a guitarist who had spent his life on stage. Glenn kept quiet. He persisted, determined to finish his firepower sections, helping Judas Priest's album embody power, energy, and endurance. However, as the band prepared for their global tour, Glenn Tipton knew he had to make his toughest career decision, leaving the stage. For Glenn, quitting performing meant leaving his dream life. He was never one to let difficulty cloud his judgment. He publicly stated that Judas Priest deserved a great tour and didn't want to hold them back. He had to make the difficult decision to retire from live performances and hand over the stage to firepower producer and guitarist Andy Sneap. Despite no longer performing full-time, Glenn Tipton was essential to Judas Priest. He surprised fans with encores of Breaking the Law, Metal Gods, and Living After Midnight on various nights of the tour. Every time Glenn took the stage, tens of thousands of fans go wild, because they were seeing a warrior's indomitable spirit, not simply an act. Glenn fought for more than himself. He decided to inspire others with his battle. The Glenn Tipton Parkinson's Foundation, founded by Judas Priest, funds research and supports patients worldwide. Rob Halford stated Glenn doesn't want sympathy. No, he just wants people to live, fight, and perform music. Firepower Tour proceeds went to Glenn's charity, with thousands of fans contributing. Not only was Glenn Tipton a famous guitarist, but he showed them tremendous perseverance in the face of life's toughest obstacles. Glenn Tipton was remembered for his enthusiasm as much as his speed and technique. Parkinson's may have robbed his playing skills, but it couldn't take his heavy metal warrior spirit. He is more than a musician. He represents strength and determination. Glenn Tipton is irreplaceable to Judas Priest, who may continue their adventure. How do you view Glenn Tipton's fight? What motivates you most about him? Please comment below and help us honor a legend. Personal life: Glenn Tipton was a fighter on stage and a Judas Priest legend, but he was a quiet man who lived modestly. Glenn never partied or got involved in controversies despite being in one of the greatest heavy metal bands. Despite his wild image, Judas Priest had a tranquil, profound personal life. Glenn married Sue Tipton and had Rick and Karina. Despite his career's continual touring and long absences, he kept in touch with his family. Glenn was never involved in tabloid scandals or contentious affairs, unlike many rock and roll performers. Family and music were always his priorities. Glenn Tipton was known for never seeking attention outside of his performances. Glenn was more grounded than many rock guitarists, who lived lavishly on beer, drugs, and affairs. He focused on music, family, and personal hobbies, preferring quiet time with loved ones to media attention. Glenn's interest for motor racing and fishing helped him temper heavy metal's intensity. He enjoyed racing sports cars and resting by the sea when he wasn't on stage or in the studio, a rare luxury for rock stars. Humility distinguished Glenn Tipton from other heavy metal legends. He never brags despite being one of the genre's top guitarists. Glenn rarely mentioned himself in interviews. He focused on Judas Priest's group spirit, honoring his comrades' contributions rather than seeking individual glory. His modesty garnered him peer and fan appreciation. Glenn Tipton's music, modesty, and dedication as an artist continue to leave a legacy after he retired. Legendary heavy metal musician and emblem of resilience and integrity. He was admired for his life and performances, present and past. Though he no longer performs nightly, Glenn Tipton remains an integral part of Judas Priest. He has contributed to the band despite Parkinson's condition in recent years, keeping his 4-decade-old spirit alive through music. Glenn contributed to composition and guitar parts on Judas Priest's 2024 album Invincible Shield, indicating that his metal zeal had not changed despite his physical issues. He no longer led Judas Priest on stage, yet every note still had his legendary signature. Glenn still surprises Judas Priest fans at special shows, even though he can no longer attend complete tours. He makes the encore memorable by picking up his guitar and playing Breaking the Law or Metal Gods alongside the band. Every time he performs, the crowd erupts, not only for the show, but because he represents resilience. Of heavy metal's resilience, Glenn Tipton's tireless advocacy for Parkinson's patients continues beyond music. The Glenn Tipton Parkinson's Foundation funds research and helps people globally. His path goes beyond music. He has inspired millions of people battling their own struggles, showing that the human will can overcome anything. Glenn Tipton's legacy goes beyond Judas Priest and Parkinson's. He redefined heavy metal guitarists. He was more than a great musician throughout his career. He was a musical architect and dreamer. His riffs inspired the next generation of guitarists, especially Dimebag Darrell. Avenged Sevenfold, Pantera, Sinister Gates, Mark Tremonti, Alter Bridge, Zakk Wylde. Glenn Tipton is one of the best heavy metal guitarists and a symbol of persistence after 50 years with Judas Priest. Parkinson's slowed him down, but he never lost his rock music fire. Glenn Tipton's name will live on in heavy metal regardless of how long Judas Priest stays together or evolves. Besides everlasting music, he left more. His legacy shows that rock and roll is about energy, perseverance, and emotion, not speed or technique. Have any Glenn Tipton memories? What motivates you most about him? Comment your ideas below. If you like Glenn Tipton and his legacy, like and subscribe to the channel to keep learning about rock and roll classics. Please share this video with your friends to preserve Glenn Tipton's music and spirit in heavy metal fans' hearts forever.